Many thanks for choosing us. The Republic of Guinea is the first amongst a number of African countries repatriating their citizens from Tunisia after the country's increasingly authoritarian leader called for a crackdown on migrants from sub-Saharan Africa. The African Union at the start of this week condemned the comments of the Tunis President Kais Saied, which it says is targeted at immigrants and goes against the foundation principles of the African Union. Already, Guinea and Ivory Coast have commenced their repatriations, with scores arriving last night. Blessed Soga is with our international desk, and he joins us with more. Blessed, exactly what statement did the president of Tunisia make?
Basically, Kais Saied is indicating that the sub-Saharan population is being used as a tool which, in his views, being used to change the demographics of the country. He believes that some traitors, as he's describing them, are filling his country with illegal immigrants from these sub-Saharan countries, dominantly black race countries, and we are beginning to change how things are done in his country. So he's indicating that, well, in spite of all of the support that he's giving during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, these countries are betraying him by working with some external forces to have an influx of, the black population in this country, and to change the fortunes and the demographics, or the demographics, as you may want to call it, of his nation. A reason for which he says that he will crack down on these individuals in his country. And the situation is beginning to raise eyebrows. Some countries are already alarmed. Guinea is the first to take an action on this. They are beginning to repatriate all of their citizens in Tunisia. Why Tunisia? Because Tunisia is the main connecting spot to Europe for many illegal immigrants, a reason for which some of these sub-Saharan African countries are beginning to take their own steps, identify their citizens, and to bring them back home. So we've seen Guinea start the process. Cote d'Ivoire, which is our bordering country, is the next to take that step, and they'll be joining Guinea in a few moments from now. We're expecting that more and more African countries will trigger that diplomatic process just to ensure that their citizens are safe. Because in the morning, for instance, there was one individual on the BBC sharing his accounts and indicating that, for instance, law enforcement agencies may not come to your aid if they find you being attacked by a relatively white individual who happens to be a citizen of Tunisia. So that's how bad the situation is getting, a reason for which the authorities in the country, in these sub-Saharan nations, are beginning to repatriate their citizens.
So which countries are repatriating so far?
As I've indicated, Guinea, the first batch arrived last night. We saw their leader, you know that they're being run by a military junta. So Mahamadou Doumbouya, who's now the head of state, the colonel himself led that process. They brought the first batch through their presidential aircraft. And so that set has arrived. They arrived last night. The belief is that they're continuing the process all throughout this week, throughout the weekend, and more nations such as Cote d'Ivoire, because they've also indicated their readiness to join that process. They are also joining SAME. The bigger issue has got to do with Ghana, because we are equally concerned about what happens then to our citizens. You have a huge population of Ghanaians studying in Morocco. The temptation is that you may find some influx as well, moving into the likes of Tunisia and trying as much as possible to make it into Europe. So that's why we are equally triggering our process to try and reach out to the Ghanaian population out there. The last call we made got us somewhere close to Morocco. The student union there, their leadership, they've assured us that they are safe. However, they're having challenges reaching out to their colleagues in Tunisia. So that's where the challenge is, and we're waiting to see that if we can indeed reach out to them and find out how they're doing.
Blessed, we know that the African Union has expressed displeasure about this. What exactly is it saying about this?
The African Union believes that the statements by President Kais Saied goes against the foundation principles of the African Union. The African Union is to ensure solidarity amongst the African race. It comes as a surprise to them as to why the leader would now be making such comments which they believe goes against the tenets of the Union. Beyond that, they are asking the Kais Saied regime to try as much as possible to respect international law and laws governing the rights of migrants. So that's the back and forth between the African Union and Tunisia, which has a long-standing and a unique history with the African Union itself. That back and forth going on at the multilateral level as we speak. So that's what's happening.
What's our own Foreign Affairs Ministry saying? Has it spoken about the safety of our citizens yet?
No statement so far from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration. It does not rule out the possibility that indeed our missions, and mind you, Tunisia does not have an embassy here. So they have a consulate, obviously. Our embassy may be closed in Rabat or wherever they may be, maybe trying to initiate some processes back home here to also ensure that we reach out to the population in Tunisia. Mind you, some of the individuals who may be there might be illegal immigrants. So documentation and identification processes may be a bit cumbersome. But as of now, officially, there's no comment from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration. We're still making attempts to reach out to the ministry so we can see what then is being done at that level. But for now, no indication at all or whatsoever from the ministry in that regard.
Let us go on with those updates from there. Also joining us via Zoom is Dr. Mary Boatema Sentrana. She is Director for the Center for Migration Studies at the University of Ghana. Doc, I'm grateful for your time this evening. Why should countries, including Ghana, be worried about this crackdown on illegal migrants in Tunisia?
Thank you very much, and good evening to your listeners. I think, as we have all heard, we should be worried because, especially for those of us who have been making policies for governments, who have been working with African Union on protection of migrants, no matter their status, whether they are irregular, we need to protect their rights. And so for a government or a president to now ask the citizens to crack down, that's a very serious statement. And also that's why AU has come in, because AU is it has a model, it's encouraging its members to develop migration policies, and within those policies to be able to ensure that there is free movement. And as we are talking now, there are other projects that we are talking about how AU can ensure that its members allow free movement without any visa restrictions. We have the African Continental Free Trade, where we discussed tapping into different resources and different skills across borders. And so it's actually, this is a blow to us, especially those of us in the field of migration studies, to see this. But again, it's also not too surprising because we know of the history. Historically, many countries have previously done this, including Ghana. I mean, when we had the Alliance Compliance Law, and people were thinking that migrants were taking away our resources, we all remember that Gege time, these things historically have happened. But currently, contemporary, we're thinking that we have moved or we have passed that stage. And now we are thinking of migrant rights, protecting migrants wherever they are. We are even thinking of not using words, abusive words on them. But this falls within xenophobic attacks. I mean, just as we've been reading in other places, and the attacks on them, it's also not safe. And so then, as it's not surprising that countries are going in for their citizens, and Ghana, I'm very sure, will do same. And so this is something that, I mean, Tunisia has been a transit country. I mean, it was Libya, and then you know the chaos that happened in Libya. But all these Northern African countries have been transit country for migrants. And so for it to come up now, then it's something which is there. It's just that it's been undertoned. But for the president to come out clearly, then it means that we need to take this very seriously. And
I'm happy you mentioned that, because in 2021 alone, over 20,000 irregular migrants were arrested by Tunisian authorities. Why is North Africa usually, a go-to spot for illegal immigrants?
Yeah, so you see, when you check the routes that goes to Europe, although it's a small country, but let me just show you some of the routes. So when you talk about the northern routes. It runs from the East and Horn of Africa through Sudan and Egypt into Israel. We have the northern or the central Mediterranean routes. That goes through Libya as the main gateway country between Africa and Europe, and sometimes along the Mediterranean Sea. And so it's a transit point. I mean, from there, you could even see some lights of Europe, some part of Spain. And so it's closer in terms of the transit routes. It's the same with Morocco. And so you find a lot of West African migrants using those paths to those areas. And so that is why we have that number of people using those routes. But again, apart from the fact that it's a transit, some people also feel settled. So we have had history of West Africans settling in Libya for a long time, even in Morocco. So some have also resorted to settling in these areas. We have students, we have other businessmen and women who are also there. So the statement was not just targeting, although the feedback looks, if you read the feedbacks from the likes of African Union, is being polished this time around. They are trying to distinguish between undocumented, documented migrants. But the initial speech was not targeting these categories. It just said black migrants or migrants from sub-Saharan Africa. And that is...
What's your advice? Should Ghana join other sub-Saharan countries in repatriating their citizens? I mean, for the fear of attacks?
Well, they should. I mean, for migrant protection is key. So once the president is not ready to protect and the president has given that speech, we need to protect, because the fundamental human rights states that each person deserves freedom, each person deserves protection. And so for protection rights, for human rights' sake, we need to go for our people. That should be the first, before we put with any other thing.
But you agree with me that these immigration issues boil down to economic empowerment. I mean, what should authorities be doing to discourage perilous journeys into Europe?
Yes, so we have found that studies that we have done have shown that people are moving because they feel they don't have jobs, they don't have better opportunities, especially young people are saying that they can't farm, they can't even have access to farms to do better farming and commercial farming. And so there are those pushing factors from our country that is pushing people away. And so one, I think that for us as migration experts, we should get to a point where it's a choice. We know that at any level of development, people will move. Even at advanced stages of development, people will move. But people should not be moving because they are pushed out. It should be a choice. And so we need to, as a nation, we need to create opportunities. We need to ensure industrialization, create jobs for our people, so that at least, even if they are moving, they will move in a regular means. And government should also encourage bilateral agreements where people are employed, even if it is low-skilled, especially the low-skilled. When we are skilled and we are migrating, it's not a problem. But the low-skilled, we can have some bilateral agreements so that we export them regularly. And this is how some of these young people, even for some of them, just 1 year, 2 years, and getting some capital is enough for them to come back. And so these are discussions that are being tabled on different platforms for governments to take advantage of.
Professor Mary Boatsima Setrana, I'm grateful for your time. She's head of the Migration Center for Migration at the University of Ghana.